I want you to tell me, what matters to you? Most people can answer pretty quickly. It's family, health, relationships, freedom, learning, faith, creativity, friendship, building something meaningful. Maybe simply having enough time to enjoy being alive. Now, let me ask you a difficult question. Can I see those priorities in your calendar? Not your intentions, not what you believe you should care about, not what you tell people that matters. Show me where your time actually went last week, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Where were the hours? Was it work, family, exercise, friends, your phone, television, commuting, learning, creating, recovering, doing things you don't even remember doing? Because there's an uncomfortable possibility. The life you say you value and the life receiving your time may be two completely different things. And if that's true, which one represents your real priorities? That is the file we're opening today. Welcome to episode 11 of Life Philosophies. Your calendar reveals your priorities. Last episode, we talked about defining success. Instead of automatically accepting the scoreboard handed to you by culture, family, career, social media, or comparison, we asked, what actually counts as success to you? Maybe you decided health matters, relationships matter, freedom matters, meaningful work matters, creativity matters, and that's all fine. But writing something on your personal scoreboard does not automatically make it a part of your life, because there's a difference between professed values and lived priorities. And one of the clearest places to see that is difference in time spent. Your calendar is not a perfect moral document. We'll talk about why, but it doesn't contain evidence. And sometimes that evidence tells a very different story than our intentions do. There are inequalities in almost every resource: money, opportunity, health, education, power, freedom, support. But there is one constraint every human life encounters. Time moves in one direction. You cannot store Tuesday for later. You cannot earn back an hour from last year. You cannot save unused minutes in an account. You receive a day. You allocate it. Then it's gone. That makes time different from money. If you lose $100, you may earn another $100. If you waste an hour, you may have other hours, but you will never have that hour again. So when we talk about priorities, time matters because every yes contains a hidden no. An hour spent doing one thing is an hour unavailable for something else. Economists call this opportunity cost. Life has opportunity cost too. Now, let's make an important distinction immediately. If your calendar is full of things you don't love, that does not automatically mean those things are your deepest values. You may work 12-hour shifts because bills have to be paid. You may spend hours caring for someone who needs you. You may commute because housing closer to work is unaffordable. You may be navigating responsibilities you didn't freely choose. You may be in a season where survival takes most of the available time. So the simplistic statement of you make time for what matters is not always true. Sometimes you don't control enough of your time to do that. A better statement is your calendar shows how your time is currently being allocated and therefore gives you evidence about the structure of your life. Some allocations are chosen, some are constrained, some are necessary, and some are accidental. The useful work is learning the difference. Take your week and imagine dividing your hours into 4 categories. Number 1, necessary time. Things required to maintain life and responsibilities, whether it's sleep, work, cooking, cleaning, commuting, childcare, appointments, and basic administration. Number 2, committed time. Things you agreed to, meetings, organizations, social commitments, projects, responsibilities, and promises. Number 3, intentional time. Time deliberately directed towards something you value. Exercise, reading, creating, being with people you love, learning, rest, or a hobby. Number 4, default time. Time you didn't really decide to spend. Scrolling, watching one more episode because autoplay started, checking your phone repeatedly, browsing without purpose, sitting in indecision, doing something simply because it was easiest. The most interesting category may be the 4th, because necessary time can be difficult to change. Committed time may take effort to renegotiate, but default time often hides hours that technically belong to us and disappear without a conscious decision. Think about how easily a day can happen without being deliberately designed. You wake up, check your phone, get ready, go to work, come home, eat, sit down, open something, scroll, watch, and go to bed. Then repeat it. Nothing dramatic happened. No terrible decision was made. But a life doesn't require terrible decisions to drift. It only requires enough default decisions. That's important. People often imagine an unintentional life as the result of one catastrophic mistake. Wrong career, wrong relationship, wrong city. Sometimes, but more often, drift is quieter. It's hundreds of small decisions where whatever is easiest became whatever happened, and repeated long enough, whatever happened became your life. There's another resource hidden inside the calendar. It's attention. You can physically spend an hour with someone while mentally spending that hour somewhere else. You can sit at dinner while checking notifications, take a walk while thinking about work, watch a movie while scrolling, work while repeatedly checking messages, read while switching tabs every 3 minutes. So calendar time is not enough. There is where your body is and where your attention is. A person may technically have 2 hours of free time, but experience it as 20 fragmented pieces because attention keeps being interrupted. This is why modern distraction is not merely a productivity problem, it's a life problem. What repeatedly receives your attention repeatedly receives pieces of your life. I want you to open your screen time report. Don't judge it yet. Just look. Suppose it says 3 hours a day. That doesn't sound enormous when distributed throughout the day. 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, 20 minutes before bed, 5 while waiting. But 3 hours per day is 21 hours per week, roughly 90 hours in a 30-day month, more than 1,000 hours over a year. Again, this is not phones are bad. Your phone may contain work, friends, family, books, music, navigation, education, entertainment, business. But the question is, did those hours buy something you actually wanted? And that is a very different question. We also need to reject another trap. Not every hour needs to be productive. Rest matters. Entertainment matters. Doing nothing can matter. A conversation that accomplishes nothing can still be worthwhile. Watching a movie can be time well spent. Playing a game can be time well spent. Sitting outside can be time well spent. The goal is not to optimize every minute. There's another form of imprisonment. The question is whether the time was chosen or merely consumed. There's a difference between deliberately watching a movie because you wanted to relax and realizing you've watched 4 hours of something you didn't even care about because you never decided what else to do. You've probably said, I don't have the time. Sometimes that's completely accurate, but sometimes the more precise statement is, this isn't receiving priority over the things currently occupying my time. That sounds harsher, but it's useful. I don't have time to exercise. May be true, but perhaps the calendar contains 5 hours of television. I don't have time to call my parents. May be true, but perhaps there are 40 minutes of scrolling every night. I don't have time to write. May be true, but perhaps there are commitments you keep accepting because saying no feels uncomfortable. Again, this is not about guilt. It's about accuracy. You can't redesign what you refuse to describe accurately. People often say, my family is my number one priority. My health is my number one priority. My career is my number one priority. But you can't have 10 number one priorities. Eventually, priorities compete. A work opportunity appears on the same night as a family event. Sleep competes with finishing a project. Exercise competes with another hour of work. Saving money competes with convenience. Friendship competes with staying home. The word priority becomes meaningful when two valuable things conflict. So the question is, what wins when values compete? That's where the hierarchy becomes visible. Not because the losing value doesn't matter, but because finite resources force ranking. This connects directly to episode 10. Suppose your personal scoreboard says health, relationships, freedom, creativity, and meaningful work. Now examine the last month. Your health, where is it? Relationships, where are they? Creativity, where? Freedom, did you create any? Meaningful work, how much attention did it receive? Maybe the answer reveals strong alignment. Good. Maybe it reveals a gap. Also useful. The purpose of defining values is not to produce a beautiful list. It's to create a reference point against which your actual life can be examined. Values without allocation remain intentions. But there's another complication. Your calendar may reflect priorities from 6 months ago. You accepted the responsibility then, joined the organization then, started the project then, agreed to the recurring meeting then, built the routine then, and now your values have changed, but the calendar hasn't. This creates what we might call calendar lag. Your life can continue executing old decisions long after the person who made those decisions has changed. That's why calendars accumulate. Commitments rarely disappear automatically. They remain until something removes them. So occasionally ask, would I still say yes to this today? If the answer is no, you've found a possible outdated commitment. Some commitments look small when accepted. One meeting, one subscription, one responsibility, one favor, one project. But commitments often recur. 1 hour every Tuesday doesn't sound significant. Over a year, that's roughly 50 hours. A 30-minute daily habit, more than 180 hours per year. This doesn't make recurring commitments bad. It makes them expensive. Small repeated commitments can shape a life more than large occasional decisions, which means the question before saying yes is not only, can I do this? It's, do I want to keep paying for this with future time? Many calendar problems are not scheduling problems. They're boundary problems. You know what matters. You know what you'd rather do, but you keep saying yes. Why? You don't want to disappoint someone. You want to appear helpful. You fear missing an opportunity. You want to be liked. You don't want to seem difficult. You assume you'll somehow find the time later. Then the calendar fills, and suddenly you have no space for things you claim were important. Every meaningful yes eventually requires some no's. A priority without boundaries is merely a preference. So, I want you to look at a calendar completely filled with blocks. At first glance, it can look impressive, busy, important, or productive. But where does thinking happen? Where does recovery happen? Where does spontaneity happen? Where does the unexpected conversation fit? Where does nothing happen? We often treat empty calendar space as something waiting to be filled. But perhaps some empty space should be protected. Capacity has value. A road operating at 100% capacity becomes fragile. One disruption causes congestion. A financial budget with zero margin becomes fragile. A calendar works similarly. If every minute is allocated, one unexpected event can destabilize the entire day. So maybe a successful calendar should not be full. Maybe it should contain some margin. There's a strange danger in becoming highly efficient. You learn to complete tasks faster. What happens? Sometimes you receive more tasks. You create space, then immediately refill it. Productivity can become an infinite game where increased efficiency never produces increased freedom. It only increases throughput. So ask yourself, What is productivity for? Is it the goal to do more, earn more, create more, serve more people, gain freedom, finish earlier, have more time? Different answers produce different systems. Efficiency without an endpoint can turn every improvement into another opportunity to become busier. Here's an exercise that I want you to try. Don't design an ideal life. Design an ideal ordinary week. No vacation, not retirement, not a fantasy where nobody has responsibilities, but a true, realistic week. How many hours of work? How much sleep? How many evenings committed? How often you exercise? How much family time? How much solitude? How much learning? How much unstructured time? How much entertainment? Don't start with the calendar you currently have. Start with the life you claim to want. Then compare the two, your ideal week versus your actual week. The gap is your information. Now, I want you for 7 days to track your time. Not forever, only 7 days. And use broad categories. For example, work, sleep, relationships, health, maintenance, entertainment, creation, learning, and unintentional. Then calculate, roughly, where the week went. There are 168 hours in 7 days. So subtract sleep, subtract necessary work, and subtract essential maintenance. And what remains? That is your discretionary time. Now examine that portion carefully. Does it resemble your stated priorities? That is where this exercise becomes useful. Now, take your discretionary activities and create 3 columns. Column 1, keep. This time clearly supports the life you want. Number 2 column, reduce. This activity has value, but it's consuming more time than I want. The 3rd column, remove. This is receiving time almost entirely through inertia, obligation, or outdated commitments. Don't attempt to rebuild your life overnight. Find one thing, one recurring activity, one commitment, one default behavior, one block of a time. Then change it. Small calendar changes compound. There is a reason important but non-urgent things disappear. They don't scream. Exercise doesn't usually send an emergency notification. Friendship doesn't always create a deadline. Reading doesn't demand completion by Friday. A creative project can wait indefinitely. Meaningful things are often patient, which makes them easy to neglect. So, if something matters, sometimes the solution is remarkably boring. Schedule it. Call your friend Tuesday at 7. Exercise Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Writing Saturday mornings. Date night Thursdays. Reading 30 minutes before bed. Not because everything meaningful should become mechanical, but because what isn't protected often gets displaced by what is urgent. People often delay valued activities because they imagine they require large blocks. I don't have time to exercise for an hour. That's fine. Just do it for 15 minutes. I don't have 2 hours to write. Just write for 15 minutes. I don't have an evening to call someone. Just call for 15 minutes. I don't have time to learn. Read for 15 minutes. The point is not that 15 minutes solves everything. It's that a small amount of allocated time turns a stated value into a lived behavior. 0 minutes is an intention. 15 minutes is evidence. There's a dangerous category of life, and that is someday. Someday I'll learn the language. Someday I'll write. Someday I'll travel. Someday I'll reconnect with them. Someday I'll get healthy. Someday I'll make music. Someday I'll slow down. Someday I'll spend more time with my parents. Someday I'll take the trip. Someday isn't on any calendar, which means someday can remain psychologically comforting without ever becoming real. So take one someday and ask, what is the smallest calendar entry that would make this real? Not complete it, but begin it. Some of your priorities are not projects, they're people. And people are easy to assume. They will remain available. I'll call them later. We'll get dinner next month. I'll visit when things calm down. We'll take that trip eventually. But relationships exist through repeated contact, not intention. You can love someone deeply and still gradually build a life which you rarely see them. No betrayal required, just scheduling. That is uncomfortable, but useful. People you care about need some portion of the same finite resources everything else demands. And that resource is time. At this point, there's an obvious danger. You can become obsessive, track every minute, optimize every interaction, measure every hobby, turn friendship into a KPI, turn rest into performance, turn leisure into another achievement. Don't. The calendar is a diagnostic tool, not a religion. Some of the best moments of life are unplanned. Some time should be inefficient. Some conversations should run long. Some days should accomplish almost nothing. The goal is not to control every minute. The goal is enough intentionality that your life isn't being designed entirely by default. I want you to choose one thing that you say matters. Just one. Maybe it's health, your partner, your children, your parents, a friendship, writing, music, learning, rest, your business, your spiritual life. Now answer 3 questions. Number 1, where does this appear in my calendar? Be specific. Number 2, what regularly displaces it? Is it work? Scrolling? Fatigue? Other people's requests? Entertainment? Poor planning? Number 3, what recurring block could protect it? Not someday, a real day, a real time, a real duration. That is the real test. Here's a practical reset. Look at the next 7 days. Don't redesign everything. Just find one thing to remove. Something that doesn't deserve the time it's receiving. One thing to reduce. Something useful that has expanded beyond its value. One thing to protect, something important that keeps getting displaced. One thing to leave empty, a block of margin. Then run the experiment, not forever, just 1 week. See how the week feels. Then adjust. Imagine I could see only your calendar. I couldn't hear you describe your values. I couldn't read your goals. I couldn't see your vision board. I couldn't know your intentions. All I had was a record of where your time went. What would I conclude matters to you? Would I be right? Maybe not completely, but remember, calendars contain restraints, responsibilities, necessities. But now narrow the question. Look only at the time that was genuinely yours. What would that part of your calendar say? That's where the answer becomes more interesting. So, let's close the file. Your calendar is not a perfect representation of your values. Sometimes time is constrained. Sometimes survival takes priority. Sometimes responsibility requires sacrifice. Sometimes the people and things you care about don't receive as much time as you wish they could. So, this isn't a guilt exercise. It's an examination, because time is finite. Attention is finite. Every yes has an opportunity cost, and the accumulation of those choices becomes the structure of a life. You don't need to optimize every minute. You don't need to eliminate entertainment. You don't need to become productive from sunrise to sleep. You need something simpler. Enough alignment between what you say matters and where your discretionary time actually goes. Look for default time. Look for outdated commitments. Look for recurring costs. Protect your margin. Schedule what is important but never urgent. And occasionally ask, would I still choose this allocation today? Because values don't live only in what matters. Eventually, they require resources, time, attention, energy, money, and behavior. So the takeaway from episode 11 is, your calendar doesn't perfectly reveal what you value, but it reveals what your current life is actually making room for. So let's recap. Episode 1 asked, who are you? Episode 2, how are you living? Episode 3, are your thoughts true? Episode 4, what story do you call your identity? Episode 5, what does your behavior prove? Episode 6, what has your behavior learned to do automatically? Episode 7, what actually belongs to your control? Episode 8, what can you do with what stands in your way? Episode 9, are you postponing your life until you arrive somewhere else? Episode 10, whose scoreboard are you using? And episode 11, where does what you claim matters actually appear in your life? And that leads us somewhere even more uncomfortable. Because sometimes you know exactly what matters. You put it on the calendar. You intend to do it. And then you still don't. You know you should exercise. You schedule it. And you don't go. You know you should write. The time is protected. You procrastinate. You know the difficult conversation needs to happen. You avoid it. You know what needs to be done. And somehow, knowing isn't enough. So the next file asks, why Do we avoid the things we know we need to do? Episode 12. Procrastination is often emotional avoidance. Because maybe procrastination is not primarily a time management problem. Maybe sometimes it's an emotional management problem. And that is where we are going next.